While negative reactions to well-intended feedback are important to deflate, the quality and the effectiveness of the feedback are also pertinent to discuss. Students value feedback when it is individualized to their learning styles and meets their needs. Research has shown that students in different stages of learning prefer different feedback. Junior students gravitate towards positive feedback to increase motivation for what they want to do, especially when they haven't developed their self-confidence yet. Whereas students in later years of training prefer more constructive feedback to increase motivation for what they have to do to become competent physicians. Senior students also value more face-to-face feedback than written or numerical feedback. One student said, "I would have liked to have known why she scored the way she did, because to me right now it's not important the raw score you get, like out of 5 or 10 or whatever they rank it. It's like more important, how can I make myself better, right? So I don't care if I get a 1 out of 5 or 5 out of 5. I want to know how I can do better." As we all understand, time is of paramount importance to teachers and to students. When instances of "there just isn't time for feedback" occur, students take this message to mean that feedback is not time-worthy. This perpetuates the culture that students do not need feedback to learn, but without feedback, students eventually rely on marks and grades, which appear to be the only tracking measure they can use to assess themselves. When the next rotation rolls around, students are often unable to respond to the final feedback, even though the teacher may have put in much thought and effort in it, thereby confirming some teachers' viewpoints that students only care about grades. When the next student initiates feedback, the teacher caught in the negative cycle may not give quality feedback. As one student explained, "I actually pulled up professors aside after PBL and said, 'Oh, so tutor, can you tell me where I can improve on so I can become a better student?' And it's the same as midterm feedback. They don't expect students to actually care. And their feedback is mundane, and it's kind of like, be respectful, read up on more things." And I'm like, cool, thanks. Very helpful indeed. That's my experience. This negative cycle can be broken. In fact, to counter the lack of time argument, feedback can come in many forms. 1. As a daily, regular, brief, informal dialogue that can happen at any time of training, provided that it is in a safe environment. 2. As a formalized session that serves as debriefing after seeing a patient. 3. As a major formative feedback, which most students and teachers conceptualize feedback as happening in mid-rotation. However, not all feedback has to be long in duration like the last. Feedback has been shown to be most effective when both parties recall the event or student behavior accurately. Therefore, feedback critical to the task at hand may be better delivered immediately. When feedback is delayed and forgotten, or only given at the end of the rotation, the feedback itself may appear distorted and irrelevant, and the student will not have the opportunity to incorporate the feedback into practice. Worse, when the student passes the rotation and moves on to the next, the feedback loses its value. This confirms the importance of continuous feedback given throughout the block, not just at the end. One student recalled during the last day of family practice rotation, "You know how in the FMPR feedback form there's a section that asks the preceptor where the student can improve on? Last box or something. So lots of them leave it blank, or write something general like, 'Bob needs to do more physical exams on people.'" I'm like, okay, I'll take that, sure. In one landmark paper, The Power of Feedback, John Hattie and Helen Timperley partitioned feedback into several types. From most effective to least, they are feedback of process, feedback of regulation, feedback of task, and feedback of self. What is interesting is that feedback of self, a generalized view of the individual and not of the task, such as praise, does not actually influence performance and can cause more confusion for the student. In fact, feedback of self, when combined with a more focused feedback such as in feedback of task, is less effective than just having the feedback of task. One student described, "You don't actually get good feedback in first semester because I feel all they spent doing for 4 months is that you're doing a really good job because you're really smart, you guys are so amazing, and that's not good feedback. It's not helpful for us at all." There are several strategies to improve the quality of feedback, such as 1. Stop. Specific, timely, objective statements revolving around observed behaviors, and an action plan. 2. Feedback sandwich to cushion the corrective feedback around validating points. 3. Open sandwich to preface the corrective feedback with a validating point. However, these are just acronyms and tools that may differ in effectiveness depending on the situation. As one teacher noted about forcing the sandwich method in inopportune situations. The sandwich is totally useless in a disaster situation when you and the student both know. With so many differences among students, it can be hard to decide how to start feedback. A strategy that can be used to identify learning styles, stages of training, and confidence is to use open-ended questions at the beginning of feedback and invite the student to discuss how they feel and what they think happened during a patient encounter or procedure. One student provided an example. She would always phrase it as a question rather than, "This isn't working for you, you need to change this." It was, "What do you think about this?" And she encouraged a mindful approach to that feedback, and I think that approach was the most helpful thing. Interpersonal relationship experts point out that there are more components to communication than just delivering the facts and intent to change. If we take a look at an assertive feedback model, there are 5 steps. We will be using this particular scenario where the student is sitting in a busy waiting room as an example. First, the feedback giver can provide a description of the learner's behavior. This focuses only on what one can observe, preferably firsthand. Once the behavior has been described, both the student and the teacher will be on the same page. A good example would be, "I saw you sitting in the waiting room," instead of, "I saw you being lazy." The teacher can then provide an interpretation of the behavior. It is very important that interpretations use the pronoun I to show accountability. For instance, "I thought perhaps you didn't know what to do next." A bad example would be, "You're wasting time," which shows judgment. The student can then understand how his or her behavior is viewed by others. This can then be followed by discussing feelings, that is, how the teacher feels about the behavior. For example, "I feel concerned for you." Feelings should not be confused with ideas or intent, as for example, "I feel you were being disrespectful." Describing consequences is the next step. Unfortunately, this step is often forgotten during feedback. Sometimes students may not see how their actions affect the teachers, themselves, or others. One can say to the student in the scenario, "The waiting room was full, and some patients were complaining that you were taking up a seat." Finally, feedback must contain intent, what you want the student to do or change. An example would be, "Next time come into the office to rest, or we can find something else for you to do." This then leads to the discussion of action plans. Students are more motivated to follow an action plan if they can create their own goals, but they may need guidance. As one student said, "It will help me in the future if I get good feedback. Don't just tell me I am good. Tell me I am good at this and why, or what can I improve on." I appreciate that a lot more than someone just telling, "Well, you're just good at this," or they just not say anything. Ultimately, the feedback's goal is to improve behaviors, clinical skills, and to help students become better doctors.